She was not merely poor, she was a truly destitute outcast, violently and irreversibly ejected from the meager, crumbling adobe shack that had served as the only painfully fragile semblance of home her 5 children had ever known. Eleanor, a woman whose youthful spirit and physical reserves had been systematically drained, leaving behind only the grim, wiry resilience demanded by the unforgiving environment of the Arizona high desert, now stood utterly exposed in the desolate, economically brutal year of 1888. Her marital status, a widow without any supporting kin or demonstrable means, was not merely unfortunate, it was a cruel death sentence, a formal declaration of non-viability in a merciless frontier landscape that only respected relentless, productive, masculine labor and the cold, hard logic of profit. Stripped bare of food, ruthlessly severed from any remaining familial support structure by her brother-in-law's greed, and possessing not a single tangible prospect of safe refuge, her plight was one of total, devastating, soul-crushing isolation. Yet, within this absolute vacuum of hope and material comfort, a profound, almost terrifying spark of inner resolve, the sheer savage, protective will of a mother, was violently forced to ignite. Every harsh detail of her environment, the vast, empty, scorching horizon, the splintered, pathetic remains of their broken door, the faint, chronic, nauseating ache of hunger that never truly subsided but only dulled, acted as a brutal, silent command from the desert itself. Yield your spirit, surrender your fight, and let the relentless dust reclaim your existence. But Eleanor clung fiercely to one horrifying, unyielding truth. Her desperate, stubborn will to live, her every calculated step, was the last precarious column supporting 4 small, utterly dependent, and innocent lives. If she allowed herself the brief, seductive luxury of collapse, all 5 would be inevitably, swiftly, and cruelly consumed by the swirling desert oblivion. Can any of us truly and honestly grasp the monumental, crushing, psychological weight of that singular, terrifying responsibility? The wise old-timers would often muse, their voices lowered and solemn with historical understanding, to those gathered in the flickering, weak lamplight of the settlement saloons. Picture the raw, unrelenting pressure on a mother, abandoned and marooned in the brutal American West of the late 1880s, forced to battle not just the literal, bone-deep cold of the canyon nights, the agonizing, constant, and debilitating reality of starvation, but also the deep, poisonous contempt and consuming avarice of her own brother-in-law. She knew with chilling scientific certainty that her unwavering resolve, her every ragged, desperate, and calculated breath, constituted the only precarious lifeline tethering her vulnerable family to this perilous, unforgiving world. The silence that followed such a reflection was always heavy with shared understanding of the frontier's cruelty. Driven past the point of mere human desperation and moral dilemma, Eleanor found herself propelled by a raw, primal, and purely instinctual drive for survival, an almost animalistic need to secure her young. This consuming, desperate drive pushed her directly into the deepest, most shadowed, and most treacherous crevices of the abandoned canyon. It was a savage, intricate labyrinth of jagged rock formations, sudden, deep ravines, and an oppressive, palpable silence, a place the local prospectors and herders meticulously avoided, convinced it was actively cursed ground, haunted by the specters of lost miners and forgotten massacres. It was precisely here, in this vacuum of communal fear and dread, that the cruel and utterly unpredictable hand of destiny chose to intervene, placing a brilliant, yet deeply treacherous, lure directly in her path. To Eleanor's famished, searching, and exhausted eyes, it initially shone with the dazzling, deceptive luminescence of a miracle, a direct, undeniable answer to months of silent, wordless, internal agony. But the stark, unromanticized, and chilling reality was tragically far removed from any divine blessing. It was a snare, perfectly designed and exquisitely gilded, waiting with malicious patience to spring shut. Before we delve deeper into the agonizing truth behind Eleanor's discovery and its subsequent, devastating repercussions, a moment for reflection and support. We implore you once more. Take a moment to subscribe to Broken Rings and provide your crucial support by clicking the like button. The deeply buried secret this woman was compelled to unearth will hold your attention captive, gripping you with its intense psychological realism until the final shocking word. Furthermore, we invite you to reflect deeply on her choice. If you were suddenly faced with an instantaneous, blinding fortune that promised guaranteed survival but was inextricably linked to a potent, actively lethal curse, would you find the moral and personal courage to risk everything and claim it for the sake of your children? Or would you leave it perpetually entombed beneath the overwhelming fear and the desolate silence of the high desert? Share your deepest, most honest thoughts with us in the comments section below. The sun, though riding high and fierce in the vast, empty sky, provided absolutely no emotional or spiritual warmth to Eleanor's chilled, utterly exhausted spirit. An endemic, debilitating, existential cold seemed to radiate perpetually from the earthen cores of the adobe walls of their ruined shack. 6 months, 6 agonizing, life-altering months of slow decay had dragged on since the terrible, unforeseen rockslide near the old mine trail had ruthlessly claimed the life of John, Eleanor's husband, and with him, the entire fragile economic foundation of their existence. His physical death was instantaneous. The resulting social and economic consequences were a prolonged, public, and social execution of their viability. Without his meager daily wage, they instantly became social non-entities, inconvenient shadows in a brutally pragmatic capitalistic community that prioritized immediate economic utility over human suffering and kinship. The dry, screaming wind of the high desert was their constant, mocking tormentor, howling like a pack of starving coyotes, constantly attempting to breach the structure's integrity, eager to scatter the final pitiful vestiges of their history. The desert seemed to breathe a sigh of collective impatience at their lingering presence. Eleanor's tired, strained gaze fell upon her 3 oldest children, and the sight was a constant, heavy, crushing weight upon her soul. Matthew, though only 12, bore the premature, severe burden of a replacement man, his jaw perpetually set in a grim, unchanging line of premature responsibility, his childhood brutally curtailed and his natural humor extinguished. Sophie, a mere 10 years old, had long ago abandoned the innocent comfort of her rag dolls, adopting the fearful, responsible mantle of a secondary mother, her small face etched with worry lines that mirrored her mother's. And the youngest, little Luke, only 7, possessed large, pleading eyes that reflected nothing but the chronic, debilitating, cavernous emptiness that consumed his stomach, a physical void that Eleanor felt as a burning shame. They were not merely suffering, they were socially marked. Eleanor, the widow's pariahs, a designation of complete and utter isolation in a world where social capital and kinship were the primary, fundamental, and necessary mechanisms of survival. The final, decisive, and humiliating blow to their fragile existence arrived, not through some anonymous decree, but delivered personally and sadistically by her own flesh and blood. Richard, John's brother, a man whose character was permanently etched with grasping, calculating opportunism and a deep-seated meanness, rode up to their battered doorstep. There was no pretense of mourning, no offer of familial compassion. There was only a cold, unwavering, and legalistic demand cloaked in self-righteousness. The foreman requires the structure cleared immediately. This land, by right and by necessity, is legally mine now, Eleanor, Richard stated, his voice devoid of human warmth, heavy with calculated self-interest and legal authority, enjoying his petty power. I require this space immediately for a man who is actually capable of performing a proper day's work for the mine. You have precisely 3 days, 72 hours of my mercy, to gather your scant belongings and vanish into the desert. Fail to do so, and you will be dealt with as common criminal squatters. I will personally supervise your removal. The ultimatum landed like a physical blow, a stunning shock that immediately stole the oxygen from her lungs and clarity from her frantic mind. Eleanor felt the rising bile of indignation and absolute helplessness. Where in God's name are we expected to go, Richard? They are your brother's very own blood, your kin. Can't you see their hunger? She pleaded, her voice a brittle, despairing thread. instantly dispersed by the hostile, uncaring wind. He met her profound distress with a cold, utterly dismissive shrug, a final, absolute, and unforgivable severing of any familial tie, an act of pure, calculated cruelty. They were truly and terrifyingly alone, without any monetary reserves, without a single willing relative, possessing nothing but the threadbare garments they wore and the dented iron pot, a mocking, cruel monument to the meals that were now only painful, distant, and haunting memories. Eleanor knew with a chilling, intuitive certainty that bypassed all logic that she dared not wait until the final hour of the third day. Richard's cruelty was not a personality flaw. It was a predictable, natural law of this harsh desert environment, as reliable as the setting sun. On the morning of the second day, a grim, unbreakable resolve hardened her spirit, replacing despair with a fierce, cold purpose. She carefully swaddled the small, desperately feverish baby Annie in the only remaining usable blanket, entrusting her to the grave, adult care of Sophie. You will not open this door for anyone, for any reason. You will not step outside, even if the wind carries my voice, she instructed, the terror in her own eyes mirrored and absorbed by Sophie's unnerving maturity and silence. Then, taking Matthew and Luke, she plunged directly into the silent, treacherous, and utterly unknown darkness of the Rocky Canyon. This was not merely a scavenging trip. It was a quest born of total despair, a desperate, life-or-death pursuit of the impossible. They pressed relentlessly deeper into the unforgiving terrain, far beyond the narrow, safer paths John had always strictly enforced, into a chaotic, tangled maze of razor-sharp rock and dense, thorny brush, where the high sun struggled desperately to penetrate. Eleanor's nerves were stretched taut, every muscle tense, her senses hyper-attuned to every subtle, hostile sound. The constant, gnawing fear was now compounded by the immediate physical danger of the landscape. Matthew, burdened by the desperate, premature need to prove his worth as the man of the house, suddenly lurched forward. He thought he heard the faint, telltale rustle of a small desert animal and vanished in an instant behind a screen of dead brush before Eleanor could even utter a syllable of protest. A wave of suffocating, blinding, all-encompassing terror, colder and more potent than Richard's threats, washed over her. She screamed his name repeatedly, the sound instantly muffled and swallowed by the thick, indifferent silence of the canyon. With Luke sobbing and clutching frantically at her skirt, she scrambled after him, tracking the minute signs of broken twigs and disturbed, unnatural dust, her mind filling with images of snakes and pitfalls. She located him not through sound, but through an instantaneous, absolute cessation of all noise and movement. Matthew had tumbled into a small, naturally formed depression, a deep cavity excavated by the massive upturned root system of an ancient, long-fallen pine. He was dazed, covered in earth, but miraculously unscathed. As Eleanor slid down the treacherous embankment and embraced him with a bone-crushing, tearful relief, he pointed downwards, his eyes wide and fixed. "Mom, I hit something hard. It didn't feel like any rock I know. It made a hollow sound." Beneath the enormous gnarled and exposed roots, half consumed by the dense centuries-old soil, lay a small, dark, and extraordinarily heavy strongbox, banded with crumbling, thick, oxidized metal. Driven by a sheer, combined adrenaline-fueled frenzy, Eleanor, Matthew, and Luke scraped away the stubborn earth, straining together to drag the heavy, sodden object out of the darkness and into the weak, filtered sunlight. The very instant Matthew wedged the tip of his father's knife under the lid, the corroded iron hinges let out a terrible, sustained scream that sliced through the canyon's profound silence like a violent gunshot. The rotting wood tore open, releasing a choking, fetid blast of stale, metallic, deeply buried air that smelled of decay and forgotten time. Eleanor held her breath, her heart a frantic, panicked drum against her ribs. She had truly expected nothing more than worthless, heavily rusted tools or moldy, decayed papers left by a forgotten prospector. But what greeted their eyes was a dangerous, unforgettable, glittering tableau. Lying on a scrap of moldy, faded velvet, a large antique brooch dominated the space. Set with a stone, the deep, terrifying shade of dried, clotted blood, surrounded by dull, chipped crystal shards. Below it lay a necklace of uneven, yellowish, ancient pearls, and filling the bottom layer of the box, a heavy, incredibly dense collection of coins. There were not many, perhaps 40 at most, but they were thick, crude, and made of an ancient, dirty gold, each bearing the severe, unfamiliar profile of a bearded man from a long-forgotten era, a face of cold power. Matthew, his voice cracking and trembling with a delirious, blinding ecstasy, scooped up a handful of the heavy metal. "Mom, we're rich. We don't have to leave. We can buy the entire land. We can buy all the food and medicine we need. We are safe now." The fever of instant wealth possessed him. Eleanor, conversely, was instantly overwhelmed not by joy or relief, but by a chilling, paralyzing sense of profound nausea and existential dread. This was no gift. This heavy, ancient gold, stumbled upon by a completely defenseless widow in a place universally feared, felt like a cruel cosmic jest from a malevolent god. It was not a path to salvation. It was, with absolute and terrifying certainty, a signed death warrant. It would inevitably attract a form of human greed infinitely more ruthless and devastating than their current state of destitution. "Close the box, Matthew, now! I mean it," she demanded, her voice a rough, sharp, desperate whisper, grabbing his arm with a painful, powerful, urgent grip. "You will not breathe a single word of this to anyone. Not to Sophie, not to Luke, not to any soul in this entire world. This is not our fortune, son. This is pure, unadulterated, lethal trouble. It must stay buried." He witnessed the raw, uncompromising, desperate terror etched on his mother's face, and the feverish dream of wealth instantly evaporated, brutally replaced by a cold, immediate dread. Together, they feverishly reburied the strongbox, stamping the dirt down with manic energy, meticulously determined to erase every possible sign of their interruption. The absolute necessity of their silence was now the only, fragile, and desperate barrier protecting them from impending, unseen disaster. That same night, the internal battle for Eleanor's soul began in earnest, a psychological war waged in the ruins of their life. She sat rigid, the crushing weight of their terrible secret feeling like a hot iron brand on her soul, a silent burden infinitely heavier than the hollow ache of constant hunger. Then the terror became agonizingly immediate and personal. Little Annie's cough grew profound, wet, and relentlessly convulsive, rattling her small frame. Her tiny skin was radiating a terrifying, scorching, unbearable heat. The brutal irony of their situation was almost a physical pain. A fortune lay a mere 500 yards away, yet her daughter was rapidly fading from a lack of simple, fever-breaking quinine. Eleanor's mind raced, trapped in a horrifying paradox. To use the gold was to invite death. Not to use it was to guarantee death. At the very first, faint glimmer of false dawn, with Richard's final murderous deadline bearing down, Eleanor made the most agonizing decision of her life. The terrifying, unknown threat of the cursed gold was now less immediate than the known, certain, imminent death of her daughter. She returned alone to the canyon, trembling uncontrollably, quickly unearthed the box and selected the smallest, most insignificant coin. It lay cold, dense, and unnervingly foreign in her palm, a tangible, suffocating piece of sealed, dark fate. She quickly reburied the box. She undertook the exhausting 2-mile journey to the cluster of poor adobe buildings that they grimly called a town. The coin, tightly clenched in her fist, felt as if it were burning the severe profile of the bearded man into her very flesh, giving the gold the sickening feeling of a living, parasitic entity demanding payment. Inside Mr. Evans's general store, the air was thick with the dust of decades and the smell of dried goods. She deliberately placed the heavy gold coin on the wooden counter. The sound, a sharp, heavy clack, was shocking, unnatural in the dim early morning silence. The two men who had been loafing in the corner froze instantly, their eyes snapping to the gleaming metal with naked avarice. Mr. Evans, the ancient, skeletal proprietor, picked up the coin, his expression instantly transforming from cynical disdain to stark, immediate, paralyzing fear. He brought it to his mouth and bit the soft metal, the scraping sound making Eleanor's entire body crawl, with primal dread. "Where did you acquire this, woman?" His voice instantly dropped to a low, chilling, guttural warning. This, this is a coin of the captain." He then recounted the grim local legend of the notorious bandit, who had been captured and publicly hanged 50 years prior, having supposedly buried his immense haul of stolen church gold in this very canyon. "They say this gold is fundamentally cursed, vigilantly protected by the captain's tormented, vengeful spirit. It brings instantaneous misfortune and swift death to any mortal fool who dares to claim it. Go now, quickly. Pray fervently that the terrifying news of this doesn't travel faster than you can run." The implication was clear. By using the gold, she had sealed not just her fate but the town's attention. The news did not walk. It rode on the desperate, flapping black wings of human avarice. It reached Richard's ears before Eleanor had even completed her return journey to the shack. The story had already ballooned into a tale of a massive, untapped treasure. Richard returned to the shack just before the setting sun, his eyes no longer merely reflective of basic greed, but bloodshot and burning with a feverish, manic obsession that bordered on madness. He brought with him the two men from the store, now silent, fearful, and utterly complicit witnesses to his intended crime. "You dared to lie to me, Eleanor. A captain's coin. Where there is one piece, there must be a whole massive haul. That gold, by legal right and moral claim, is mine." Eleanor stood her ground, a fragile but unyielding shield before her children. "I threw it all away. It was cursed. It almost took my son. The fever was the curse claiming its price." Richard's laughter was a short, sharp, ugly bark of total violent contempt. "You threw away an entire fortune, you absolute raving fool. You are completely insane, woman." He screamed at his men to search, but they did not conduct a proper search. They simply committed systematic, brutal destruction. They savagely overturned the family's only cot, deliberately smashed their last jar of precious drinking water, and scattered their meager, pathetic belongings across the dirty floor. Venting their frustration, Matthew watched the destruction, his small hands instinctively gripping the rough handle of his father's wooden knife, the cold, pure internal hatred replacing his fear. Finding absolutely nothing, Richard, enraged beyond all measure by her defiance and her survival, seized Eleanor's hair, cruelly yanking her head back to force her to meet his furious, terrifying, bloodshot gaze. "I know it is still hidden somewhere in the canyon. You will bring me every last piece by the break of tomorrow morning. If you dare to fail me, I swear on my dead brother's soul I will return, and I will burn this hovel down to the ground with you and your 4 bastards trapped inside. I will stand here and savor the agonizing spectacle. Do you understand the smell of burning flesh, Eleanor? You will learn it." He rode away, the sound of his horse's hooves fading, leaving behind a silence far more charged and terrifying than his loudest, most profane threats. In the smoking, ruined silence of the aftermath, the final, most profound horror unfolded. Little Luke began to shake violently, consumed by a sudden, inexplicable, raging fever. It was not a natural sickness. It was an unnatural fire blazing through his small body. He stared fixedly into the deepest, darkest shadows of the ruined shack, his voice a terrified, painful rasp. "The tall man, Mom," he whimpered, his eyes wide with a sight only he could see. "Tell him to go away. He's watching me. He has eyes that shine like fire and malice. He wants the coin back." The truth was an undeniable cold weight. The curse was real and actively seeking retribution. Eleanor felt a suffocating, paralyzing tide of soul-crushing pull. She had dared to profane the treasure for a single coin, and the captain's vengeful spirit had returned to exact the full, terrible, and ultimate price. As the clock ticked agonizingly toward the witching hour of midnight, Luke's small body went terrifyingly limp, his breathing a shallow, barely perceptible, final flutter. "No," Eleanor pleaded, her voice a desperate, wordless prayer to the unseen, malevolent shadow. She knew the terms were absolute and non-negotiable. The curse demanded a total, unconditional forfeit of the gold. She ran back into the blackness of the canyon, frantically unearthed the strongbox once more, and raced not toward the town's illusory safety, but toward the absolute point of no return, the deep, silent, terrible ravine. At the sheer, dizzying edge, she raised the box high above her head, a desperate, final, sacrificial offering. "I don't want it. Take it back, you bastard spirit. Take it all. Give me my son. I throw it back to the earth that spawned you." With a scream torn from her very soul, she hurled the heavy, dark box into the terrifying, gaping void. The sound that followed was unmistakable and terrible. A wooden crash, instantly followed by the distinct crystalline clinking of heavy gold coins, scattering and bouncing endlessly across the jagged rocks far below. Silence. The payment had been made in full. She stumbled back to the ruined shack, her heart utterly deadened and empty. She found Luke. He was peacefully asleep, his skin cool, his breathing deep and perfectly regular. The unnatural fever had instantly broken. The terrifying shadow was gone. The curse had been fully and finally honored, but the price of their survival was total destruction. At the break of dawn, Richard returned, his face set in a look of cold, murderous finality. "Where is it? Where did you move it?" he demanded, already holding his oil-soaked, flickering torch ready. "I threw it all away," she repeated, her voice now steady and resolute with the bitter, simple truth. "It was cursed. It is gone forever, swallowed by the ravine. You will never find it." Enraged beyond all reason that she had both defied him and survived the destruction, Richard, without a moment's hesitation, tossed the lit torch onto the dried thatch. The shack instantly exploded into a roaring, hungry inferno. Eleanor instinctively grabbed her children, dragging them to safety just as the main structural beams collapsed. They stood at a distance, safe but utterly ruined, watching their entire history dissolve into a towering column of thick, black, stinking smoke. When only a smoking mound of rubble remained, Richard mounted his horse. "The land remains mine. Do not ever return to this part of the canyon. If I see you again, I'll finish what the captain started." He rode away, leaving them utterly destitute, exposed directly to the cruel, blazing desert sun. With every material possession utterly destroyed, Eleanor led her children back to the only place that offered any form of concealment or potential shelter: the deep depression where the gold had been found. As she felt the cold, loose earth to flatten a spot for them to rest, her hand struck a tightly wrapped package of greased leather. Inside was not gold, but a brittle piece of aged parchment, a map. It detailed the depression, leading to a specific point marked by 3 stacked stones in a series of wavy lines. The map led not to hidden monetary riches, but to hidden water, a perennial, untapped spring. In a land defined by chronic drought and the constant threat of death, this discovery was the true, immeasurable fortune. The gold had been a distraction, a cosmic test for the soul, designed to mislead the greedy. "Matthew, stay here. Guard your sisters. I'm going to find the water. We have nothing left to lose or fear," she told him, her eyes finally alight with a cold, clear purpose. She followed the map's crude directions to a narrow, hidden crevice marked by the 3 stacked stones. She pushed aside the dense curtain of vines and crawled into a small grotto. She heard the sound, a sweet, relentless drip, drip, drip. Bubbling directly from the living rock was a constant, clear, life-giving thread of water. The true shining treasure was the clean, bright reflection of light in this sacred, flowing spring. As Eleanor knelt, gratefully drinking the cold water, the heavy, unmistakable sound of a boot crushing dry stone cut the air. Richard. He had waited and tracked Gier, his primal greed now fixated on a far more critical prize, the source of life itself. He entered the grotto, his eyes dilating in monstrous, covetous realization. "Water! This is the real fortune. This is worth more than all the captain's gold. This is now mine, and it is worth your life, Eleanor." He lunged violently at her, his face contorted in a terrifying mask of total, absolute possession. "Leave my mother alone." Matthew, having followed her, stood resolute at the entrance, his father's knife trembling in his hand. Richard charged toward the boy, intent on crushing him immediately, but his feet slipped instantly and violently on the slick, wet mud created by the spring's constant overflow. The very water he so desperately craved, the treasure of life, became his ultimate undoing. He fell heavily backward, his head slamming with sickening, blunt force against the 3 stacked stones that marked the life-giving spring. There was a horrifying, muffled thud. He lay utterly still, a thin, dark line of blood slowly beginning to mingle with the clear, pure spring water. Justice, primitive and absolute, was delivered not by the hand of her frightened boy, but by the irresistible, crushing weight of the man's own blind, consuming greed, executed by the very land he sought to steal. Eleanor and Matthew, silent and shell-shocked witnesses, covered Richard's body with rocks in a quick, desolate act. The canyon swallowed the last dark secret. They did not become wealthy in the manner of the townsfolk. Instead, they became the new, secret, invisible guardians of the spring. They built a strong, hidden stone house adjacent to the constant, trickling water source. They planted the last of the cornmeal they had purchased, and the traces of its dark, cursed origin were entirely washed away by the clear, pure water. The children grew up strong, deeply connected to the wild, harsh rhythms of the desert. The captain's gold that had been revealed as a mere illusion, a simple test for the unworthy. The true treasure was the silent, life-sustaining flow from the stone. They had not conquered the desert. They had, against all odds, simply endured it, finding the only true lasting fortune, the absolute assurance of life for every tomorrow. The widow and her 4 children found the ultimate treasure, the unyielding source that allows one to continue to breathe and live when the rest of the world has attempted and failed to drown you in despair. Subscribe to Broken Rings.